Hi, it's Dan Beck again, and got another parable for you. Here's where things start getting a little interesting. So fasten your seatbelts. You're about to hear some parables that you've never seen in this perspective before. Um, there's a parable of the Tennants who a king, a landowner so rich I don't believe this story has the king, but he leaves all of his resources and he goes out to conquer a kingdom, conquer a kingdom, and he leaves his resources, this vineyard, to the tenants, and that parable just to point out that he's a very generous person. I mean, he's very trusting to hand over control of all these resources of the vineyard. That parable there kind of goes along a little bit with this parable of the great wedding feast, because in the story of the great wedding feast, um, he was so generous that a lot of people owed him a lot, and when the time came for the feast, some of them actually killed some of the messengers who he had sent to invite them to the feast, and they abused them and killed some of those messengers. And I would say they were under obligation, to come bringing a very nice wedding gift for the man's son. Now, this son also is an important piece, because this man's son actually connects to the parable of the prodigal son. Now, the prodigal son was someone who left his family and went off with half or part of his portion of his inheritance, and it said that he wasted everything. And so, when he comes back, his brother is aware that he's wasted everything, even before his brother sees him, and so there's an instinct that this waste that has happened is kind of well known, and that's the motivation for folks to not come to this wedding, because this man has invited all of his friends to the wedding, and nobody's wanting to come. He ends up having to go on the highways and byways and invite people into the wedding, and it points out that he invites the good and the bad. So there's no distinction he's making here, because his good friends, none of them were worthy enough to come. It's noted that they were unworthy. They found perhaps the marriage and the return of the prodigal son, that he was unworthy, and so they passed judgment on the prodigal son, perhaps. But I'm just pointing out now that these parables are connected and were more than likely revealed and talked about in a sequence, so that a person could follow along more than just a short little parable, one making one point, one making another. That when you combine these parables, they begin to form a much richer and longer and a more in-depth story that kind of ties the motive of these people together. So the motive for them beating the servants who were inviting them, telling them that it's time to come, motive is that they owed too much to the king, and they were going to pretend like they never heard that they got an invitation. And the others who heard the invitation, they found other better things to do, because they were offended and didn't want to celebrate the waste, the marriage of this wasteful son. Is such a terrible person. He wasted all of this money, and waste is a big thing to people who are materialistic. I mean, waste is it's like the second greatest thing wrong that you could do with people in need around you, is to be wasteful. So people will withhold a lot of times any kind of compassion and generosity towards anybody, because that could be termed wasteful. Anyways, Are you still with me? I'm trying to keep it straight myself. So you have the prodigal son story connected a little bit to the great feast story, connected to the Tennants story, connected to the king's story, connected to the two sons. Now, the two sons, it was two sons that were talked about. One of them says to his father asked him, "Go into the field and work." And he says, "I'm not going to do it." And but later he changes his mind. He repents and he does it. So he goes to the second son. He says, they ask him to do this task, and he says, "I will." But later he puts it off and just forgets about it. And I thought how interesting, just this little story about two sons, because there's a story of the wedding feast. It's also the story about the prodigal son is also a story similar in that there's two sons, and that there's some kind of tension between these two sons. And so I thought, well, the one son says, "I'll go," "I won't go," but changes his mind. The other says he'll go, but he doesn't go. And I thought, well, the father, he sits down at the dinner table with these two sons, and the one that said he'll go, he's, of course, he's, "Thank you for taking care of that." Well, now he says nothing. He's thinking to himself, did I take care of that? I think I forgot to take care of it, but he doesn't say anything. So the other son who said, I'm not going to do it, he's sitting there, and the other one's taking credit for what he changed his mind to do, that he in fact was the one who performed the task. Jesus says, which one did the will of the Father? The one who said he wouldn't, didn't change his mind, or the one that said he would and then forgot or put it off? And so that would be enough tension for perhaps the prodigal son to say, I've had it with you guys, I'm out of here. And maybe never even say why, but just decide, give me half of my inheritance. I can't take this anymore. I'm going to go somewhere else where I'm appreciated, And he goes away. When he comes back, his brother knows that he's been wasteful. Here he wants to come back as a servant, but the father doesn't let that happen. Somehow the father figured out who really did the task that he asked him to do, and he figured they put it all together that the prodigal son was in fact hurt, that his brother taking credit for the very thing that he repented and did after all. So now, if all that's the case, or we can speculate, we're putting flesh and blood on the bones of Jesus' story is what we're doing. Trying to make sense. We're asking the question, why did the prodigal son go in the first place? When he's wondering that kind of at the end of the story, he says, even my father's servants get treated better than this. I got to get my butt back home. Anyways, so now that we have the parable of the prodigal son, we have the parable of the wedding feast, and the people are not showing up. So what happens? He goes to the highways and byways, and he gets the good and the bad. The wedding is full of guests, and there's this one guy there, and he approaches him and says to him, "Friend, how comest thou without a wedding garment?" Which is basically say, "Hey, you're not dressed for this wedding, are you?" Well, his friend now, just one person he called friend, says absolutely nothing. He is offended. And the fact that he's offended is signaling and saying something. He's silent, and his silence is what gets him treated like a common thief. He says, tie this guy up and get him out of here. Wow. Because he wasn't dressed right. Well, what if I was to tell you that when he went up to him and he approached him and said, "Friend, how comest thou without a wedding garment?" Perhaps he was one of the original friends that were invited to the wedding. And out of all of the people, they found someone to beat and someone to ignore and someone to put off and say, I don't want to come. Out of all the people, this guy did come, but he's dressed in the typical wedding attire, and guess what? All the people who would have come dressed like him didn't come. And so he was the only one overdressed. Isn't that interesting? Here he is. He's overdressed, and he's around all of these street people. Excuse me. All these street people, what? Good and bad. And he doesn't like their company. And it is his fixation with their dress. And that becomes the humorous statement for the king, for the lord of the wedding feast to come up to ask him, why comes there without a wedding garment? It was supposed to be a kind of a humorous point, because it's a little bit embarrassing when you're the only one overdressed, is it not? And the very fact that he couldn't laugh it off, he couldn't connect the dots, that he was offended, told this person in charge, he's told him, you've got no business being here, buddy. You're no better than anybody else. Quit acting like that. And then treat him like a common thief. Isn't that a wise and interesting take on that parable, as well as combining all the parables together of the prodigal son, of the man who had two sons who were given a task to do, of the tenants who were put in charge, just clarifies just how generous this person was, and the very fact that people felt too obligated for the wedding gift that they didn't want to come because they had nothing to give. It could even remotely match the generosity and the faith that this person had. And then the fact that it was well known that the prodigal son was wasteful or didn't take care of these resources that he was supposed to take care of, that he was an offense to them because they coveted all of the materialistic things that the father had. And went to see somebody else waste them at just more than they could take. In my opinion, I would say that that's a really good, solid, humorous, and interesting story, a wise story, and the very fact that they are broken down and told by the different apostles is in itself wisdom. Because one point Jesus says to God, I thank thee, Father, that thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent and delivered it unto babes. That's a really interesting point also, because guess what? What's coming down the road is in a parable about wisdom. About wisdom and another wedding. And these are 5 virgins. There are wise, and 5 that are foolish. And the Lord God of heaven is toying with man with these parables. He's toying with man's wisdom. And Jesus is recognizing, saying, I thank thee that thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent and delivered it to babes. So it's not just the wisdom, but it's those who think that their wisdom makes them better than everybody else, and gives them an opportunity to look down on others, and gives them opportunity not to show them other people the compassion that they had to receive all their life from different people in order to just be alive. We all need each other. That is where I'm going to leave it. We'll get to that parable of the 10 virgins later on. But this particular parable and list of parables was extremely important. And if you're not totally blown away by now, take time to read them all. I'll give you could Google each one of them separately. At some point, I'll try to provide the whole list in order. Have a nice day. Thank you for listening. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button if you liked this tying of the parables together. Bye now.